Over the last week, there was a Palestinian unity deal that was brokered by Beijing. Ali, you've been looking at this carefully. Tell us about what's going on there.
Yeah, lots of people been asking me about this. I've been getting emails and messages, so I thought it would be good to take a look at it. And I'll point out that any moment now, our colleague 𝐄𝐤𝐿 𝐈𝐧𝐭𝐫𝐶𝐚 is also publishing an analysis of this at the Electronic Intifada. It may even be published by the time the live stream is done. If not, I think it will be up in the next few hours. But basically on Tuesday, 14 Palestinian factions, including Hamas, which of course leads the armed resistance, and Fatah, which runs the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank under Mahmoud Abbas, signed the Beijing Declaration on Palestinian Unity following talks hosted by China. China is touting this as a high-profile diplomatic achievement, as we can see from the grand signing ceremony that you can see there in Beijing. China is also saying that this agreement embodies its overall approach to the region, which focuses on fostering peaceful resolution of disputes through dialogue and economic cooperation and development. And Beijing is very deliberately offering this as a contrast to the American approach. We read, for example, the following sentences in an editorial that appears in the official China Daily, headlined China heralds new dawn of hope in the Middle East. And this excerpt says, China's growing influence in Middle Eastern diplomacy is not without its critics. Some Western voices question China's intentions and capabilities, often driven by fears of diminishing Western influence in the region. However, the pragmatic and cooperative nature of China's diplomacy offers a counter-narrative to the often divisive and competitive strategies of the past, end quote. So that's a not very subtle dig, particularly at the United States, which Beijing sees as fostering conflict and division. So let's look at what's in the deal. The text has not been officially published, but a leaked version has appeared online. Al Jazeera reports the deal finalized on Tuesday after 3 days of intensive talks lays the groundwork for an interim national reconciliation government to rule post-war Gaza, said Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. Mustafa Barghouti, head of the Palestinian National Initiative, one of the factions to sign the accord, told Al Jazeera the agreement goes much further than any other reached in recent years. He said its four main elements are the establishment of an interim national unity government, the formation of unified Palestinian leadership ahead of future elections, the free election of a new Palestinian National Council, and a general declaration of unity in the face of ongoing Israeli attacks. He said that the move towards a unity government is especially important because it, quote, blocks Israeli efforts to create some sort of collaborative structure against Palestinian interests, end quote. Now, some of the things that struck out to me, and this is from looking at the leaked text, which was published in Arabic in Al-Masri al-Yawm, is that in the Beijing Declaration, the Palestinian factions agreed on, quote, the right of the Palestinian people to resist the occupation and end it in accordance with international laws and the United Nations Charter, end quote. The factions also pledged, quote, to support and back the heroic steadfastness of our struggling people and their valiant resistance in Palestine, end quote. Now, previous so-called reconciliation agreements, intra-Palestinian reconciliation agreements, of which there have been many, but just to name two, there was one in 2014, and then the 2017 Cairo Agreement, for example, do not mention resistance and the right to resist. The Beijing Declaration also includes, quote, a commitment to the establishment of an independent Palestinian state with Jerusalem as its capital in accordance with relevant United Nations resolutions, especially resolutions 181 and 2334, and ensuring the right of return in accordance with resolution 194. What's notable here is that the declaration explicitly mentions UN General Assembly resolutions 181 and 194, Resolution 181 grants Palestinians a state, albeit in the context of the 1947 UN partition plan, while Resolution 194 guarantees the right of return of Palestinian refugees. By contrast, the declaration does not explicitly mention Security Council resolutions 242 and 338, which are the main references for the so-called peace process and the so-called two-state solution. These resolutions do not grant Palestinians a state, and they marginalize the majority of the Palestinian people, especially the refugees. Now, I just want to go over a few other points on this thing, just giving you my quick reactions as I read it. There have been a lot of positive reactions. I was quite surprised, for example, to see UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres welcoming the breakthrough in Beijing. His spokesperson said that Guterres, quote, very much welcomes the signing of the Beijing Declaration by the Palestinian factions. I'd also say the role of China is significant because it shows Beijing once again directly challenging the monopoly long claimed by the United States on any diplomacy in the region. We heard Michael Link earlier mentioning the memoirs of the late UN Secretary General Kofi Annan, who talked about how the US always monopolized that role. We can also recall how last year China brokered a landmark reconciliation deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia. So this is an extension of that Chinese foray into regional diplomacy. China, as a rising world power, is also sending an important signal by treating Hamas as a full and legitimate part of the Palestinian political scene and not demonizing it and sidelining it as a so-called terrorist organization like Israel, the United States, and the European countries. And the deal has an important declaratory effect of robbing any legitimacy from the American-led planning for a so-called day after in Gaza, where under Washington's fantasies, Gaza would be run by Israel and the United States through Arab collaborator proxies disguised as a so-called peacekeeping or international force. So the main message of the Beijing Declaration is that Palestinians and Palestinians alone have the right to decide their future on their land. Now, a couple of points on the downside. Despite the optimism and fanfare, there's little reason to believe that this agreement will actually result in any kind of real unity any more than the very many such reconciliation deals that have been reached in the past. That's because the basic contradiction between Hamas and the other resistance factions on the one hand, and Fatah and the Palestinian Authority on the other hand, has not gone away. Of course, Fatah and the Palestinian Authority collaborate directly with the Israeli occupation and work with them. And so the only way to reconcile these two irreconcilable positions is either for Hamas and the other resistance factions to give up resistance, or on the other hand, for Mahmoud Abbas and Fatah to give up collaboration with the enemy occupier and join the resistance. And neither of those things are remotely likely to happen. And recall that just a few days ago, I think we talked about this last week with Abdel Jawad Omar. Just last week, Mahmoud Abbas issued a statement blaming the Palestinian resistance for Israel's ongoing massacres in Gaza. And in light of the Israeli response to this, of course, Israel's response has been extremely negative, as you'd expect. It is likely that Mahmoud Abbas will be forced to distance himself from the declaration or undermine it very quickly. And that's because it's just an inescapable fact that the Palestinian Authority's continued existence and survival is 100% dependent on the goodwill of Tel Aviv. Two final points. There's no timetable for any of this. So it remains aspirational, but there is no sort of clear timetable. And then I'll just say that the Chinese approach remains, and of course China's not unique in this, remains wedded to the defunct two-state solution. And in that sense, China's policy has more in common with the West. It really has to be admitted at this point, at least in my opinion, that there's no way that Palestinians are going to live side by side with an entity that is perpetrating a literal Holocaust against them. Nonetheless, I think the takeaway is that it's very significant that China fully recognizes Hamas and the resistance as legitimate actors, and that really is a sharp contrast with the American approach, which criminalizes and demonizes resistance.
Yeah.
So those are my quick analysis of it.
Yeah, my quick thoughts were that it's interesting that they said that the PLO is the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinians and didn't address the fact that Hamas and Qassam and Islamic Jihad and Saraya al-Quds, the main political forces, the main resistance forces, the main government forces, are not part of the PLO, and the PLO reformation would be something that would be more important to have at a meeting like that, rather than to be talking about where the boundaries are, or these questions that Palestinians don't really have any control over, instead of dealing with the things that they actually do have control over, which is reconciliation, a national unity government. Allow that national unity government to let them come up with the proposals that the people of Palestine then vote on. And so it seemed to me to be real upside down to do it through the PLO. I understand that these states like China and Russia are kind of trapped in this PLO as the sole representative diplomacy framework. The way to get around that would have been to have a conference where you bring Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Saraya al-Quds, and the Qassam brigades into the PLO. Which is what
Yeah.
Yahya Sinwar has been trying to
Yeah,
do for almost a decade now, and the
which is
Palestinian prisoners have been trying to do for 20 years, because
Yeah.
in 2006 they put out a Palestinian prisoners document right at the same time as the Fatah Hamas fighting was started, looking for national reconciliation on those questions. So these are very old questions, and then to have it be at the end of these 20 years to come back to the PLO as the sole representative without addressing the.
Well, I
Yeah.
would say, John, I mean, I think the response of those who drafted or signed this agreement would be that the call for elections to the Palestinian National Council, which is, of course, the legislative body of the PLO, in which all factions would take part, would be the mechanism through which these factions are brought into the PLO. But that has been expressed in previous agreements repeatedly, and it's never happened. And that's what I mean by this being aspirational. So yeah, you're right. All those issues are there, and I don't think that this is going to lead to any immediate transformation. But there are those points that I made about why it's significant that I think are worth noting.
And what has been the reaction from the Israelis so far to this? We had the foreign minister, Israel Katz. I
Yeah,
think
he
we have a tweet.
tweeted,
Yeah.
and it's quite like there we go. I'll read it
Yeah.
for those who are listening. Hamas and Fatah signed an agreement in China for joint control of Gaza after the war. Instead of rejecting terrorism, Mahmoud Abbas embraces the murderers and rapists of Hamas, revealing his true face. In reality, this won't happen because Hamas's rule will be crushed, and Abbas will be watching Gaza from afar. Israel's security will remain solely in Israel's hands.
And
So,
of course, yeah, I mean, Abbas has been Israel's subcontractor of the occupation.
yeah,
As you mentioned earlier, in a statement from the Foundation of Defense in Defense of Democracy, one of the most right wing CIA cutouts of the last 20 years or so. Abbas said, that he blamed Hamas
yeah.
for the genocide of the Palestinians in Gaza. So, once again, nothing Mahmoud Abbas is doing pleases anyone. And yet the US and the Israelis are going to continue to work with him, even though they're disparaging him publicly.
Yeah, and that's the irreconcilable difference at the core of this. You cannot have national unity between resistance and treason,
Yeah.
and that's always been the division that goes back to you know 2006, 2007, when the American-backed coup attempt after Hamas won the elections tried to rob Hamas of its victory and sort of reinstall uh, Fatah as the uh, party in control of the Palestinian Authority, even though they'd lost the elections. What ended up happening is that the coup was partially successful. It was successful in the West Bank, but failed in Gaza, where Hamas took control. And the reason that all these reconciliation efforts have failed and will continue to fail is because you can't unify with someone who is um, working with those who are trying to kill you, and that's that no language can paper that over. All the Palestinian factions use this language of unity and aspiration of unity, and it's something Palestinians want, but you cannot paper over that irreconcilable difference. So
Mm.
that's the bottom line for me.
Thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit like, leave a comment. These engagements help us with the YouTube algorithm, and it helps us to get around Silicon Valley censorship as much as possible. It does make a difference. You can also support our journalism by going to electronicintifada.net and clicking on donate now. Thank you.